Hello and welcome to today's Association for Manufacturing Excellence webinar titled Lean Goes Digital, Applying Lean to Data and Information Processes. I'm Judy Zarnick, Membership Manager for AME. Today's presenters are John Brandt and Paul Albano. John is the founder and CEO of the MPI Group, a global management research firm, and the former editor-in-chief and publisher of both Chief Executive and IndustryWeek magazines. His new book, Nincompoopery, Why Your Customers Hate You and How to Fix It, is based on groundbreaking research into leadership and performance excellence across more than 50,000 organizations. John has earned more than 20 editorial awards for excellence and also led more than 300 advisory, marketing, research, and data engagements for clients. Paul is Senior Manager, Integrated Marketing and Vertical Marketing for Canon U.S.A. He has more than 25 years of marketing and product management experience in Canon U.S.A.'s Business Information Communications Group. He also manages a team of subject matter experts to help shape Canon's products, solutions, and services to meet the needs of customers in key vertical markets. Before we begin, just a couple of items. This webinar is being recorded, and you'll receive a link to the recording for playback. You will be in listen-only mode throughout the webinar. If you have questions during the webinar, please type them into the questions area of the attendee panel and click submit. We'll review the questions at the end of today's presentation and answer as many as we can. Now, I'm pleased to introduce John Brandt and Paul Albano, who will present Lean Goes Digital, Applying Lean to Data and Information Processes. Take it away, John.
Hey, Judy, thanks for the great intro. And Paul, welcome. Thanks for joining me today.
Hey, John, thank you. And I want to also thank the audience for attending our call today.
Terrific. Yeah. Well, Paul and I are going to talk. This is pretty informal today. We're going to be talking about Lean Goes Digital. How do you apply lean and lean principles to data and information processes? And this is a really interesting topic because when you think about what is most valuable in firms today, and especially in manufacturing firms, a lot of times, the processes we have, the products we make, the knowledge we have, but if you think about the flow of information, a lot of times we've got information flowing throughout the firm, and we may not be tracking it and recognizing how valuable that is to our balance sheet and how valuable that is to our customers and to the way we create value. And what we wanted to do is we were fortunate enough to be able to work with Canon to talk about, okay, this is a pretty interesting topic. How would we go about studying this? How would we go about taking a look at what is important about manufacturing and information management in these situations, and how can we make that better? So to do that, after a lot of consultation, we decided to work together on some new research. And Canon sponsored the research. We did the research at MPI. And it is pretty groundbreaking. We wanted to take a look at lean, at information management and governance, and specifically taking a look at the practices and the performances that organizations across a wide array of industries, but including manufacturing, how do they do this? How are people doing this right now for information management and governance, and how well are they doing at it? We were able to get great research from 151 companies, and we found is that it was clear, and what our hypothesis was, is that if we could just apply lean principles to information governance and management, there would be an improvement in outcomes. I want to stress that all these insights are coming from really senior executives across 5 different sectors. We do have a breakout of some of the manufacturing data by itself, but they were across manufacturing, across financial services, education, legal, and healthcare. And I also want to say here, I have to do the pitch here. The pitch here is, you're getting John and Paul on the webcast today, but you can see us live and in person at the AME conference in Chicago on Tuesday, November 5th, and we would love to see you there to talk in more depth about this. So, Paul, if you want to add anything, fine. Otherwise, I'm going to just fly right into this.
Yeah, no, John, it was a great study, and as you said, a lot of what we found there can be applied to many different verticals. So, but there's a lot in here that are particularly of interest to folks in the manufacturing sector. So, looking forward to sharing what we learned in the
Let's go.
Look forward to seeing everyone at the conference in Chicago.
We'll see you at the conference too. So when we talk about Lean Go Digital, what we found, to summarize in sort of 3 broad areas, is that when you look at the way people are doing it now, and there are some people who are leaders and they're doing things significantly differently from people who are not leaders in this, there are 3 things. First of all, like any other lean initiative, like any other lean improvement program, you have to start with a strategy. Number two, you need to make sure that you're leveraging best practices to make sure that your information workflows are as lean as your production and processing workflows are. And three, you got to figure out how to focus on performance and metrics, and what are the performances and the metrics that you should be looking at. So what do we mean start with a strategy? Well, one of the things that was really disturbing is that when we said, please describe your organization's strategy for executing its policies regarding information management and governance. And remember, this is so important right now because that's where the value of our company is these days in terms of intellectual property, what we know, customer data, et cetera. Only half of the participants in this study had an information strategy that was clearly defined, that was aligned with organizational goals, and that had tactics that were well known, and that was widely disseminated throughout the company. We found that 83% of manufacturers had a strategy defined and disseminated to most of their organization, but not to all. And this is an issue because we're going to see later on that this having a strategy and doing that, that's one of the things that leaders in this space do versus laggards and other folks. We asked, who's leading this? And what we found is that in general, C-level teams and information technology departments are most commonly responsible for strategy execution. The C-level team, you got up there at 46%, information technology at 42%. After that, cross-functional. We also found that manufacturers are more likely to rely on their IT departments to execute information management and governance strategy, about 60%, than maybe some of the other areas are, which is an interesting take there. And then we ask, how effective is your organization's ability to successfully execute on its information management and governance strategy in the following areas? Most organizations were telling us that they had effective strategy execution, although we had a significant portion that said that they were having some trouble. And you'll see this chart here. The green is extremely effective. The purple is very effective. Yellow is moderately effective. The teal is slightly effective, and the gray is not effective. These are ranked by extremely effective. I think what's really interesting, though, is that when you look at where organizations say they are having the most success, it seems to be at sort of the basics of securing and storing. When you start looking down at things like leveraging information for operational benefits or organizing it, maintaining it, retrieving it, the numbers go down there. And also, I'm going to say that we see, as we do in a lot of studies, the perception of these executives at how well they're doing sometimes is at odds with the actual metrics that we see for them going forward. And we'll take a look at that a little bit later. Oops. So to get a flavor for how this does, I'm going to turn this over to Paul, who can talk about a company called Clark Equipment and what they did in terms of setting a strategy to make sure that they could improve their information workflows, more specifically moving from paper to digital. Paul?
Yep. Hey, John, just like you said, you're 100% right. It all starts with planning and setting a strategy for executing policies regarding information management and governance. And to highlight your points, I find that most organizations, particularly large companies, have some form of process in place for conducting strategic planning activities. Like the study said, 83% of manufacturers did have some strategy in place. But these activities start to fade as we move to smaller and smaller organizations where, although there's some basic planning taking place, it tends to be less formal. In most cases, it's ad hoc at best. So the way I see it, strategic planning is kind of under assault. The nature of business today is one of immediate deadlines. There's nonstop activity, 24/7 expectations with the internet and so on. So in this situation, we struggle to keep up with the demands of day-to-day responsibilities. So we have to make trade-offs, and strategic business planning ends up being an afterthought. But it's very important to start with a plan and set a strategy. So in the case of Clark Equipment, we work with them to set a strategy to migrate from a fully paper-based system of managing.
And Paul, this is a company that rents equipment, right? So they've got a lot of documentation going on, a lot of workflows of information between them, customers, et cetera.
Yes, fully paper-based company. A lot of documentation. When we first started working with them, they were basically printing everything. They were basically had multiple storage rooms filled with files in every department. Paper would move through their branches. In some cases, they were literally being posted in different departments, resulting in multiple copies of the same document throughout the company. So, as you can imagine, this caused huge delays in business processes, such as reconciling statements, invoices, as employees had to search for key documents. So, the key stakeholders in the organization recognized the need for a document management solution that would enable easier archiving and retrieving of files, also help reduce printed paperwork, identify and automate key workflows such as accounts payable, which would help free their staff handling a lot of the mundane document printing and document handling tasks. So if you go to the next slide, we talk about the actual solution that was implemented. We helped them implement a process automation solution using Canon software that acted like an electronic filing cabinet, and this had universal web access, so anyone can access it, of course, with the appropriate usage rights. But also incorporated optical character recognition to minimize data entry. So documents would be scanned, and keywords would be kind of tracked or picked up, so you could easily retrieve those documents later on. So they went from being a paper-based company to totally digitizing their documents. And this, John, ultimately increased their efficiencies and employee ownership of the processes. It also reduced duplication with documents and duplicate efforts, reduced the amount of lost documents and costs associated with having to go back and reprint them or recreate them. But the bottom line is it improved customer satisfaction. So they could respond to customer inquiries more quickly. They could pay their suppliers, and at the same time, they could also get paid a lot quicker too. So it all comes down to helping them become more lean, become more efficient, and then ultimately it helped improve their employee productivity. And at the end of the day, what's most important was it helped improve their customer satisfaction.
Terrific. Thanks for that. I think it's interesting, and I think that example comports well with sort of what we saw in terms of the study. We found, again, if you've got half of people who don't have their strategy that is well defined, either developed, defined, or disseminated, this is something we see over and over again. If you don't have a plan, we see this in study after study on topic after topic, you are unlikely to succeed or to improve. This really has to begin at the senior executive level, among those who have power to make decisions, to allocate budgets, people who can, invest in tools, hire, et cetera. We also found that a quarter or more of organizations said that their ability to successfully execute on their strategy has resulted in only moderate impact. And the reason that's important is when you start looking at the amount of money that organizations in general, and I believe manufacturers in particular, are investing into securing and trying to figure out how they can then manage their information more effectively and for greater gain, that seems like not a great return on investment. So what we would see there is that in general, execution of strategy, if it's not going well, it could be the strategy itself. It also could be, though, not taking a look at, what are new best practices? What are new technologies? How do we digitize? What are people in our space doing to digitize? What are people who are in adjacent spaces doing to digitize? Sometimes we see, when we look at things like information or the Internet of Things, we see a lot of times that part of the issue is ideation, that executive teams don't really have a handle on, well, what could this look like if we did something differently, if we invested in new technologies, if we just thought differently about our business and where and how information sits. So I'd encourage everybody in this audience to take a look at your organizations and start thinking, how could we think really differently going forward about the way we manage one of our most valuable assets? So that's the first thing. It's kind of a striking thing. Again, we've seen it in other studies on other topics, but this lack of strategy. Well, the next thing then is, well, even if you develop a strategy or have a strategy, how do you make that work? And what we've seen in Lean across multiple initiatives, not just information, is that you have to figure out what are the best practices that the leaders are doing and how can we implement those. And this is one where we saw, frankly, even bigger problems with the strategy, because information management best practices seem to be missing at a lot of organizations. the question we asked was, which of the following information management practices are in place at your organization? And you will see up on top here that you've got barely a few, there's about 4 where even 50% have those in place. You get down to things like identification and categorization of information, automated classification, knowledge management gatekeepers, a master data plan. A lot of the things that are just sort of basic in making sure that you are keeping your information secure and that it is available for you to leverage for your customers and for profitability are just not there. When we look at manufacturers, the most used are breach awareness and response policies, and that's only by 57%, and cross-functional collaboration for managing information, 57%, which of course means that 43% are not using it. Pardon me. There is an enormous amount of opportunity for manufacturers and organizations in general to start adopting some of these best practices that leaders are already using. We found that information system best practices are also missing. You look at this again, you've only got 2 where over 50% of organizations are doing it. That's information access authorizations, making sure that the right people are having the information, that the wrong people can't get it. Or number 2, scheduled upgrades of information systems. It is hard to imagine a company remaining competitive over the next 5 or 10 years unless they're making sure that their information systems and the data that they are relying on is up to date. All the other practices, less than 50% of companies are using them. The most used information practice among manufacturers is information access authorization, but that's only 63%, which is a really low percentage, I think, given how valuable intellectual property or a number of the other things we've talked about are for these organizations. We again find, okay, so we found that best practices to improve information management, they're also missing at organizations, and there's only one of these that's at 50% or more, and that's periodic purging of old or irrelevant information. It's also so that's the top one. Everything else is under 50%. Things like, periodic review of work streams, standardization, waste elimination, all the things that you would say lean would tell you to do here, you've got less than half of companies doing that. For manufacturers in particular, the top ones are periodic review of an information work stream, standardization of content and mapping. Maybe a manufacturer is a little bit ahead in some ways in adopting lean principles or adapting them into new realms. But again, I think those are really low and show an incredible opportunity for manufacturers and other organizations going forward to improve what they're doing. So not surprisingly, if you're going to see that you've got all these best practices in a variety of areas that are missing, it's not surprising that organizations face a big bunch of information problems. And these are ranked by significant problems. That's the green. There's significant problems in green. There's some problems in purple and no problems in yellow. And what you see is that for every single one of these, well over half of participants are having either significant or some problems. Worse, they're having multiple information systems. We all know what a disaster that can be, or waiting for information, or too much information, or formats don't fit, or lack of quality control. It just goes on and on and on. And it is not surprising these are here given the lack of attention that many organizations are putting on this. Manufacturers, the most significant problems for them are multiple information systems or having multiple formats. Again, probably not surprising for any organization, probably for manufacturers where there has been some significant M&A activity that often creates issues when systems are being merged and combined. It's not unusual to see organizations with multiple ERP systems or multiple, it can be even multiple accounting systems depending on what has gone on. So it's not surprising to see these problems, but these are problems that cost real money and prevent value from being delivered to customers and to the bottom line. So what do we do about that? Well, one of the things that you want to do here is the same thing that you would do with lean if you were looking at a production process or a transfer or a supply chain process or something to do with customers, is you're going to want to map that process. Most manufacturers, when you take a look at especially in their factories, generally would have some standardized processes in that environment, and they can pretty much, at most places, we've done other research we've done says anywhere from 2/3 to close to 80% have at least tried lean manufacturers in the U.S. They were going to have some familiarity with the common lean waste, whether it's overprocessing, defects, overproduction, et cetera. The issue for manufacturers, though, is that they tend to focus on what they can see, and probably every organization. A lot of times information work streams, the documents with them are not as visible to all of us, and they certainly aren't as standardized. And when things aren't standardized, we know what happens. It creates bottlenecks, backlogs, and problems, information wastes. One of the things that companies that are doing a better job at this are doing is they are beginning to take the same rigor that they use for value stream mapping for their production processes and others, and starting to map how information flows through their organization, and trying to figure out, well, where does information get stuck? Where does an approval not happen? And identifying where there's duplication, where there's poor quality, et cetera. Today, we would call it value stream mapping, but it is funny to go back to look at what Toyota originally called it. And Toyota originally called this material and information flow mapping. Over the years, we've kind of just value stream mapping is the term, but even as it was invented, Toyota was talking about mapping not just the material, but the information flow. If you can do this rigorously in your company, what you're going to identify is, where is information being kept, in what formats, who gets access to it, whether it's by role, by type of data, et cetera. How easy or hard is it to find it, to revise it, to delete it? Are there gaps? Do you have multiple processes for doing the same type of information? One of the things that's really important is taking a look at information security and the controls on it, because we all know how debilitating that can be for any company, and especially with regulatory authorities increasing penalties for security breaches. And do you have opportunities to improve your business, improve the value you're creating by digitizing or by enhancing collaboration with partners or with customers and improving workforce productivity? So this is what we see leading companies doing right now. And with that, I'm going to ask Paul to talk about another example he's familiar with, a company called U.S.A.
Yeah, thanks again, John. Definitely mapping helps identify information waste, and this company, U.S.A, I believe they were actually highlighted a couple of years ago at an AME conference. U.S.A is based in Hillsboro, Ohio, and they're a global manufacturer of vehicle electronic components and parts. So they ship high volumes of auto parts across the United States and across the globe. Like the previous case study, they were also very paper intensive, and they were in desperate need of a solution to help streamline the management of its shipping and documentation processes. So we helped them identify a lot of waste in some of those paper-intensive processes. Their staff spent multiple hours per day printing documents, whether they be purchase orders, invoices, estimates. They were looking for better workflows rather than a paper-driven workflow to eliminate waste and redundancies. So working with Canon, we did an assessment. We mapped out their current processes, and we helped them come up with a solution to streamline their business processes and their workflows across all company departments. So if you look at the next slide, again, we implemented solutions which included scanning and solutions which incorporated optical character recognition, which meant documents could be scanned at a device. It could be a printer-based MFP or a dedicated scanner. And using OCR technology, we were indexing and capturing key fields and key information and putting them into a digital system. Hard copy documents were no longer kept or needed since everything was now digital. It could be archived and searched later. You could now track the information. You could find and search for items using keywords or things like invoice numbers, customer names, purchase order numbers. And they were also able to take advantage of an electronic authorization process across departments. So, imagine the days when you had a paper document going around with an approval sheet. Sometimes you needed to get 6 or 7 different approvals just to process something or just to pay something. If that approver was out, there would be delays. So now everything's automated now. Everything is done online using an automated system to approve documents. And that also enabled better security and better auditing. So you could tell exactly who approved what date and time. And you can also set different authorizations based upon the person's title or the value of the contract. So all in all, it led to substantial time savings for expense approvals and handling of their shipping documents. and also helped improve their cash flow in terms of accounts payable and accounts receivable. So much more secure, much more efficient, a lot less waste. So again, working with them to map out their processing and come up with a solution really helped out U.S.A.
Terrific. Hey, thank you, Paul.
Sure.
So what do you have to do here? Well, one of the, we've talked about the fact that it's important to do value mapping. There's some other things that we found out. We found out that most organizations are collaborating on information governance, but haven't really evaluated their risks. Because we said, to what extent do different departments and functions collaborate on defining, executing, managing governance? And most people said there's at least some collaboration going on there, or moderate collaboration. What's interesting, though, is that they may be collaborating on trying to manage information, but we ask, has there been any effort to evaluate the value of content, the value of your data in your organization against a risk management matrix? And you had 3/4 of everybody told us no, they hadn't done that yet. And in fact, it was even worse for manufacturers who may have the most to lose, where you had only 17% have done that, where they've actually said, okay, this is how much our data, this is how much our content is worth, and given that, what are the threats we face, and what would be the potential downsides if there was a breach or if we don't improve our management of this? We then ask, do you have standardized information management and governance processes for a variety of types of information? And maybe not surprisingly, legal documents, contracts, financial documents, accounting information, those were the ones that tended to be most standardized. 80% of manufacturers, for example, do that with their contracts, and 70% with their financial documents. What's really interesting, and those are because, let's just face it, those are somewhat easier. They're really important, but they're more templated materials. When you start looking down around sales data, marketing materials, institutional research, R&D, customer support, internal communications, those are far, far less standardized. And so there are real opportunities there to figure out, okay, what could we do here to improve our management of this, improve our productivity and our profitability? We ask, how aware is your organization of following regulations? And organizations are most commonly aware of HIPPA regulations and state regulations. 60% of manufacturers, other state regulations. We see manufacturers doing a little bit better than other organizations in terms of GDPR, the new European regulations. Not as many are aware of the California Consumer Privacy Act. Again, this is ranked, we've got the green is not aware, the purple is somewhat aware, yellow is highly aware. You've still got a lot of folks, and the reason this is important is that if you go down this list and you look at GDPR, if you look at the California Consumer Privacy Act, these are sort of just the leading edge of regulation that is happening in this area. And you're starting to see a number of other regulatory authorities and regimes around the world start to impose their own restrictions. And it's going to be increasingly important for manufacturers and other organizations to make sure that part of what they're doing with their information governance is to have an ongoing review of what regulations are we subject to, what might we be subject to in a year or two, what do we think is coming 5 years down the road. We ask, how effective is your organization at responding to emerging compliance requirements, such as breach notifications, which is that, the minute you have a breach in a lot of regimes, you have 48 hours or 72 hours to notify authorities and notify affected breach victims that they have been affected. We had only 43% of manufacturers said that they were highly effective at responding to emerging compliance requirements. Again, that goes back to what I talked about on the previous slide here. This, as important as this is, it seems to be an area where people have tended to focus on security of information, et cetera. They're not thinking through the entire process and developing a strategy that is going to make sure that they're not just being compliant, but that they're using information management as a competitive weapon going forward, not just now, but over the next 5, 10, 15 years. Among the reasons that this could be happening is that the vast majority of information hardware is more than 3 years old. And what this says is that the green is that, we ask, describe the age of your information hardware that supports your information management and governance. Green is less than 3 years old, purple is 3 to 5 years old, yellow is 5 to 10, and the teal is more than 10 years old. And we have 2/3, it's not just the hardware. We have 2/3 of information software is more than 3 years old. And that's regardless of whether it's, enterprise content management, ERP, content management, specific applications for an industry, customer relationship. There's just a lot of the stuff is aging out there. And that's, on the one hand, that means there's going to be some expense and some investment required. On the other hand, it is an opportunity to, as part of an overall strategy, figure out how can we start doing this, not just to be compliant, but how can we leverage this for profitability in the future? So what does this mean? Well, the thing that sticks out to us is that there are tons of best practices for management, for systems, for improvement that are missing at half or more than half of all organizations. And that means we're not terribly surprised when I have a majority of organizations telling us that they've got a big range of problems. One of the actions there, some of these are best practices that can be implemented: value stream mapping, information mapping. Others can be helped with technologies or with new technologies, et cetera, as long as those are implemented in smart ways. We also find that many organizations, if you're thinking about lean, they haven't applied the same rigor of standardization to their information management and government processes. They either have some or no standardization for a lot of documents that are really critical to their business. We would encourage anybody out there who's doing this to start taking a look at, okay, when you're doing your mapping, are there ways that we can standardize this, for security, but also to make sure that we're more effective? And we also see lots of organizations with software and hardware that is over 3 years old. There's no reason to get rid of something that's working. But for organizations that have got stuff that's 5 years old, 10 years old, it might be a time to take a look and say, is this still suiting what we need now, given all the challenges and all the opportunities we have? Oops. So we've talked about strategy, we've talked about best practices. Let's talk a little bit about performance and metrics. We've found that 3/4 of customer information has been fully digitized by manufacturers. You can see here the median is 80% for what percentage of your suppliers adhere to your company's information management procedures. And what percentage is fully digitized? About 3/4. Not bad, obviously not 100%. And there's opportunities here for folks. So this is a company called Continental Paper Grading. They decided to, they're a paper company, they decided to convert to an electronic data system. They wanted to scan all their checks. They wanted to back up their paper documents for digital storage. Do their timing, they had about half of the year that wasn't initially scanned. And what that meant was they had a mix of paper and digital documents, and they couldn't catch up. And what this meant is it decreased productivity. They had, delays in what they were doing with some of their customers, with strain on staff. And they were actually facing a potential of not being able to respond to audit inquiries in a timely manner. So what they did is they ended up deciding that the information and the governance, the management was so important that this was something they didn't want to manage anymore. And they actually found a partner that they could outsource it to, who would do the conversion for them. They implemented imaging software, which allowed them to directly import this into their databases. And they were able to take something that was turning into a big issue for them and turn it into an opportunity going forward where they could be more efficient. And this is one of those things that we really stress when we look at lean initiatives, et cetera. Sometimes the best way to get better is to find a partner going forward, and that's what this company did. So we ask questions about information hardware, the reliability of your hardware and software. Most folks told us that it was rated as having good reliability or better. For hardware, 50% of manufacturers said they had high reliability. For software, about 1/3 did. And then we ask, how has your organization's current information management and government practice, how has it impacted the following? You'll see that green is negative, purple no impact, yellow some positive impact, teal is significant. And for the most part, when people have put effort into these things, they have found that there has been benefit to it. We had manufacturers who had received the most impact, significant impact to security of information and to their financial reporting. We ask, one of the big things is we've got, companies are trying to interact with each other, and there are a number of different opportunities. Does your organization have restrictions on file sharing, whether it's Google Drive, Dropbox, et cetera? And most organizations have some limits on that. Yes, there are policies, and then also, yes, there are policies, and our IT department restricts external file sharing. There is this significant minority, though, of 11% that still has no policies, which means they are kind of, that would worry me if I was at a company like that, because that is just looking for problems. We ask what percentage of your organization's information is estimated to be out of date and should be purged from systems. And what you can see here is almost nobody says 0%. Vast, 50% say between 1 and 10, but you've got a large percentage there, some 42%, that say it's over 10% of their information is out of date and should be purged. You got 47% of manufacturers say more than 10% of information is out of date and should be purged. We asked about security breaches, and we found that 2/3 of organizations have had 1 or more security breaches. 30% of manufacturers had either had 5 or more security breaches, or they don't know how many they had. And this is one of the scariest slides in this presentation, because if you don't know if you've had a security breach, you probably have had one. And if you've had 5 or more, that's an issue. This is why this whole process, the idea of taking lean to your information flows, is so important. It's not just for productivity and efficiency, profitability. It is also for survival, because a security breach can cost an enormous amount of money for a firm. So when we look at that, how do you improve that, given the fact that that's one of the scariest slides in here? There's a lot of new best practices. There are new information workflows and tracking mechanisms that can help you do that. A lot of people are using specific policies that improve data security and enhance efficiency. And we're seeing more and more companies start to include data protection technologies into their processes, making sure that protected or sensitive content is in a regulated workflow as soon as the data gets there, making sure that any digital communications use classification tools to make sure that things are cataloged, stored, and protected, making sure you're limiting access to information or devices, and frankly, spending some time. We all know that when we implement a lean initiative, and a huge part of this is employee engagement and training, one of the things that we see leaders doing that others don't is taking this very seriously and making sure that employees are aware, engaged, and trained in what are secure information policies and what aren't. So this isn't free. We found that a majority of organizations spent 5% or more of their revenues on information management and governance. We asked, what percentage, and what you can see here is that you've got 6% at 0. Those are the lost and the laggard. But you've got a majority of organizations spending at least 5%. You've got 60% of manufacturers spending at least 5%. And 57% of those manufacturers believe they're going to spend more this year. And you can take a look at for all organizations, the spending there. Again, almost everybody understands they're going to need to spend more. That's probably what is driving some of the leaders in this field to figure out that, well, if we're going to spend more on this, how can we get something beyond just security or just compliance? How can we invest this money in ways that will actually create a greater return on investment for us? We ask, how much does your company spend annually as a percentage of your operating budget on the following? And you can just see here, it's significant amount of money in hardware, software, technology security, cybersecurity, insurance. So what does all this mean? Well, we found a quarter or more of organizations say their information practices have had no impact or negative impact for a bunch of their performances. That means that organizations, even if they don't do much different, could be getting lots more out of the money, which we saw there is a lot of money they're spending right now on it. We also had, over 40% of organizations say that more than 10% of their data is out of date and it needs to go. These organizations are going to want to look at practices or solutions that can monitor and track the age or the usefulness of data or the appropriateness of retaining it. and make sure that it is eliminated or purged. We've got a third of all organizations we surveyed had more than 2 security breaches in the past 2 years. We had another 8% say they don't know. And again, my feeling is if you don't know, you've probably had a breach. This is just unacceptable. I mean, if you are an employee, if you're an executive, if you're a shareholder of a company that doesn't know or is having this many breaches, your livelihood is at risk. And so we would encourage people to be taking a look at what can we do in terms of best practices and solutions to get better there. We also had a majority of organizations that are already spending 5% or more revenue on this. A majority say they're going to invest even more. It only makes sense that if you're going to invest that level of money, because that's a lot of money there, to make sure that you're investing in ways that are, again, not just being compliant, but are actually creating value for the company and for customers. So that's the little taste that we're going to give you now. John and Paul, we're going to be live at the AME conference in Chicago on the 5th of November at 10:35 a.m. Central Standard Time. So we are looking forward to seeing you there. We will take some questions right now, if there are questions out there.
Thanks, John. We do have a couple questions. The first one is, where do you see manufacturers having difficulty when applying lean principles to information management?
John, I think I could take that one.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes. And but before I answer that question, I wanted to mention these findings are also going to be published in a white paper that will be forthcoming before the end of the year. So we're looking forward to publishing that and making it available to everyone, including AME members. So great results in here, and you know, a lot of great insights. I think would be very valuable for everyone attending here. But when it comes to difficulty about applying lean principles to information management, I mean, there's a couple of ways we see manufacturers stumble when getting started with the lean information management, and they're both fundamentally good to any transformation of any process. So first, some changes are forced into departments, but without getting any input from individuals and how they work and the ways that they would actually use information. So these changes are kind of forced on them. You've got to really go to the source. You've got to go to the Gemba. So you have to truly understand the information workflows that the people rely on before actually trying to apply a fix. Like I said before, if something's not broken, don't change it. But sometimes you do have to upgrade. You do have to make changes. But it's important to get input from the people that are actually going to have to implement it. And the second difficulty I would say is maybe just too much too soon. You may not be able to solve every information problem with your lean implementation process out of the gate. So you've got to scope it into something that's realistic, something that's attainable, and you have to train and teach people. Go department by department, a single department, single workflow, single area, and maybe do a couple of test rollouts at first. Then you can kind of articulate those solutions to others and then expand it as employees see the results and the organization gains confidence. We see this all the time, especially when we move to like a print management system where departments are not used to having to log into their printer or to use a secure print process. So we kind of start in small steps. We start with a smaller department, and then as they start to see the gains, we're able to move that out, and kind of word spreads in the organization that this new system or this new this new change is going to work. So don't do too much too soon, and really get input. Those are the two key takeaways I would say.
Thanks, Paul. We have one more question. Most information work streams are hidden. How can we better understand them?
That's a great question, because it is by nature, it's data, it's information, it's in electrons floating around us. Maybe it's a or it's a piece of paper that's going in a system. It is not as easy as tracking a physical workflow or production. One of the ways to do that would be to actually physically monitoring activities or production and trying to say, okay, asking yourself the question, what is the information that's associated with this? What are the approvals that are necessary? Is there a purchase order? How is it, how does accounts receivable, or how does go, or then taking a look at, the way work information comes in from customers or goes out. analyzing not just for waste, but okay, where would our security weak points be? If somebody was trying to get information in and out of this company, where would they do it? There are a number of solutions out there that can do this, but it really starts with basic lean thinking about, taking a fresh look with fresh eyes at what you've got going there and how do we do this differently.
Great.
That's all I got.
Thank you.
That's all I got.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Paul, for joining us today and sharing your presentation. This will bring our webinar to a close today. Thank you, everyone, for attending.